Hi, I'm WTOP film critic Jason Fraley, and all month long we are ranking the best movies in every genre. 30 days, 30 different genres, and today we're breaking down my top 25 epics. Now, a lot of these epics, immediately when you think of epics, you think of those big sword and sandal epics, is what they call it, sword and sandal, which, biblical epics like the Ten Commandments. Who can forget Charlton Heston as Moses parting the Red Sea? Again, another Heston, Ben-Hur with the famous chariot race, and, and then the big Christ finale. I mean, those two movies are like the two that come to mind when I think of sword and sandal epics. But it also includes, it doesn't have to be biblical, it can also be, the slave gladiator arena and the Colosseum, sort of like Gladiator with Russell Crowe, or Spartacus with Kirk Douglas. I mean, when they all stand up and say, I'm Spartacus, and stand up for him, come on. I mean, Kirk Douglas cries in the scene, but I'm crying every time too. Of course, when we mention Gladiator, but whenever I think of Gladiator, I think of Braveheart. Mel Gibson as William Wallace yelling freedom, and that great James Horner score. That also qualifies in the epic category. And then similar, we also get some socially conscious epics, I guess, of let's say like The Last of the Mohicans with Daniel Day-Lewis, or Dances with Wolves, which go into the Native American plight in American history, and it's crazy. Yeah, there were older movies that dealt with it, like The Searchers, which we'll get to in westerns, or even like Broken Arrow. But in terms of an epic, Dances with Wolves and Mohicans were kind of the first to really go into that. And it's almost crazy that it took so long for us to talk about the Native American genocide that happened here. I mean, that's a lot of what the country's built on. That and slavery, which is why we also include 12 Years a Slave. I think that was a really powerful epic with Chiwetel Ejiofor. In a true story of Solomon Northup as a slave, but also horrific Michael Fassbender leaning on Oscar-winning Lupita Nyong'o's head, almost like she's a fence post. It's just little choices like that. Man, to me, Fassbender is the scariest guy since Eamon Gauth in Schindler, which I know he put in biopics. See, you could have easily put Solomon in biopic, because it is a biopic. Honestly, a lot of these are 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But we have 12 Years a Slave here. We also get political epics. That's the other sort of main subgenre here in the epic category. So movies like Burt Lancaster in The Leopard, the Italian Visconti movie. The Last Emperor, Bertolucci's big epic. And then Reds with Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton. Now, speaking of Reds, the great romance with Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton, a lot of epics were these romantic epics, which, again, full disclosure, a way to count more movies, and there's definitely a romance category and a romantic comedy category, but in order to fit more of your favorite movies in those, when we get to those later, I wanted to pull out some of the big sweeping epics, the 3 and 4 hour romances, and put them in epics, because when I first think of a Dr. Zhivago, yeah, it's a great romance, but I think epic. I think the David Lean big epic, and that Maurice Jarre score in that one, the Lara's theme, oh my God, that's just one of the most iconic scores ever. So we get Zhivago, we get Reds, movies like The English Patient, Out of Africa, these big sweeping romances that really, I think they're more epics than just like The Notebook romance, which we'll get to later. But of course, and then one of the newer ones, Titanic. I mean, yes, Jack and Rose, one of the greatest romances of all time, but in a way, the whole second half becomes the big epic sinking of the great Titanic cruise liner. So I put it here in epics. Again, I know that movie has a lot of haters. I tend to like it. I mean, who cares? Call it my guilty pleasure. I don't care. I was in 7th grade when it came out, and to me, it was like kind of a seminal movie. And even if you hate it, even if you hate Celine Dion, you have to admit that James Horner's instrumental version of that is goosebump inducing. Not to mention, it gave us 2 of the best actors of our generation, with Kate Winslet and Leo DiCaprio. So 2 future Oscar winners, really young. James Cameron, it's an epic. It's an epic. But of course, the ultimate romantic epic, Gone with the Wind. Rhett and Scarlett, probably the most fiery romance that there ever has been. Clark Gable saying, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And of course, Vivian Leigh as Scarlett saying, tomorrow is another day and I won't go hungry again. I mean, it's epic. It is, and for all of its flaws, in terms of, maybe, racially insensitive in hindsight, of course, you could kind of group it with Birth of a Nation. But in terms of like the epic scope and epic sweep, I mean, it's the #1 top grossing movie of all time when you adjust for inflation, the only fair way to do it. And as Scorsese even said it himself in the AFI's countdown, that it's the greatest, biggest production of the first half of the 20th century, 1939. Hollywood epic at its most epic. Now, you might think that Gone with the Wind would be in the top 3, but this is where I'm gonna, I'm sure gonna get some daggers from you guys because it's so beloved by so many people. But because of those, I guess, morality reasons, I put it at number 4, and I didn't want it in my top 3. I love the movie. It's my grandma's favorite. There's so much to admire about it. Hattie McDaniel was the first African American to win an Oscar but it's sort of that mammy stereotype, and I just think, especially after seeing 12 Years a Slave and movies like that, I don't know if it has the moral high ground. Yes, it should be in your top 5. Those that put it below, like way out of it, then you're on the other side. You're underrating its importance as a historical movie. But for me, the top 3, I kept Gone with the Wind at 4, and what I put nudging above it, which is the movie that I think is not talked about nearly as much as Gone with the Wind, but to me is a very similar epic in terms of the same issues, but it's on the right side of history and morality, Giant. Not many people talk about this movie. It's always talked about as, Rock Hudson, Liz Taylor, and James Dean's final movie, one of his posthumous roles after Rebel Without a Cause. He's great in this movie too, striking oil and those big shots of him in silhouette climbing the oil derrick. But to me, what makes it in the top 3, and maybe because I interviewed George Stevens Jr., which is the son of George Stevens who makes this movie, but man, it's the direction. I was at the Oscars waiting to go on the red carpet, killing time across the street at a bar, and it was on TV. I mean, I'd seen it and loved it a million times, but it was on TV with the sound down because you're at this, well, it wasn't really a bar, it was like a diner, but you can't see the sound. So I was appreciating it even more for the visual storytelling, how in some scenes, Rock Hudson will be in the dark, but when it flips over, Liz Taylor's in the light because she has the moral high ground here. Just the way a lot of these things are shot, or even Mercedes McCambridge, when she gets bucked off the horse, it goes from an epic, extreme wide horizon shot of a horse bucking and going crazy. And Stevens has the guts and just daring to cut in right to the spur as Mercedes spurs it, and then back to the wide as she gets bucked off. It's weird to go from that wide to that close. There's just a lot of really cool things in this movie. Or even when Liz Taylor makes up with Rock Hudson during the wedding. It's all done visually. A young Dennis Hopper too. But to me, it's the race relations. We've seen so much about building walls and trying to divide us, and immigrants torn apart, the kids on the border. This dealt with Latinos on the border in 1956. This is 7 years before I Have a Dream. This is 4 years before Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. George Stevens is, yes, he's a white man, but they've contributed so much over history, and please go back. I think it's the most, we mentioned Do the Right Thing yesterday. I think Giant is the most important civil rights movie ever. I'm not afraid to say it. It is an unbelievably ahead of its time piece. Go back and watch it. Yes, it's 3 hours, great and sweeping score, like Gone with the Wind. But to me, I think it's on the right side of history, way ahead of its time, and it ends with the shot of the white-skinned baby and the brown-skinned baby in the cradle together. And the reason it's a giant is because Rock Hudson has learned to become a moral giant. We need more of them in the world today. Number 2, I have The Seventh Samurai. Kurosawa's epic. I mean, this, it could have gone in action movies, but because we put Yojimbo in there. But it's it's like 3 or 4 hours long, so we put it in the epics. The way he pioneers slow motion fight sequences with the samurais, they'll attack, but then they'll fall in slow motion. That happens throughout, and I think it was the first time that was done. And you might want to check me on that, but man, the way he constructs those with slow motion, movies were influenced by that forever, including The Magnificent Seven, the Western remake of The Seven Samurai. But to me, the coolest directorial piece is there's a shot with a windmill going around in the background. I think he's got a baby in his arms, and it's sort of the cycle of life. There's a lot going on there, more than just the slow-mo action. So I have Kurosawa at number 2, so influential. But number 1, the movie when I think of epics, Lawrence of Arabia. You can't, again, another one from overseas. This is British, this is David Lean. I guess it was a Hollywood co-production, but mostly Brits here. And I think it really goes into, especially in our day, we've been in the longest war in American history in Afghanistan. Obviously, Iraq's still going on. But if Lawrence of Arabia was trying to warn us a lot about this. In 1962, David Lean shows how during World War I, British colonists really carved up and divvied up the Middle East, and there's those great scenes where knowing what we know now and that we're still fighting those battles, tribe against tribe, We're all silly people, barbaric people, and and not to mention just how the iconic characters. I mean, you have Omar Sharif appearing out of the distance like a mirage, and those great widescreen vistas. If there ever was a movie to see on the big screen in wide in its original format, millimeter, see Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, it requires an intermission, folks. It's 4 hours, but what a piece of filmmaking. No CGI, so all of those horses galloping and trains going off the rails and all those big, fight war battle sequences, that's all thousands of extras. It's amazing that they did that. David Lean was a master, and Peter O'Toole in the title role, those blue eyes in the desert, and the way that they cut, the famous match cut, or it goes from him blowing out a match, there's a little flame, he goes, and then the sun immediately cuts right to the sun coming up over the desert to that great Maurice Jarre score. And Peter O'Toole spinning around with his cape on the train. I mean, it's the most epic movie of all time. Lawrence of Arabia, best epic. See my full top 25 epics on WTOP.com's entertainment page. Join us in the blog and tell us what you think about the list. And tune in tomorrow as we break down the best family comedies.